L'kutei Sichos Chelek Chav Beis, Emor Sicha Beis, Lili Nishmas Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin ben Reb Menashe Kaltman. We're going to explore the Yom Tov of Sukkot. We're going to contrast it to the Yom Tov of Pesach. We're going to learn some halachic definitions and some deeper understandings in the Yom Tov of Sukkot, primarily. And we're going to highlight some details that you may not have ever noticed before and explain how those details actually define to us what is really the Yom Tov of Sukkot. And just to give a very brief intro before we begin the Sikha, if you open up the Chumash in Parshas Emor, at the end of the Parsha where it discusses the Yomim Tovim, Pesach, Shavuos, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. So when it comes to the Yom Tov of Sukkot, which is in Perek Chav Gimel, Pasuk Lamed Daled, David just says, David Obnei Yisrael, B'chamisha Soyem L'chedesh Hashvi Yazeh Chag HaSukkos Shivas Yom LaHashem. On the 15th day of the 7th month is the Yom Tov of Sukkot. And then it talks about the details of the Yom Tov. It's Mikra Kodesh, it's a holy day, not to do Melacha, to bring the Karbanos. We know that Sukkot, there were very many Karbanos that were brought in the Beis HaMikdash. But the mitzvah of eating in the Sukkah or dwelling in the Sukkah is not mentioned until Pasuk Mem Beis, which is 8 Sukkim later. Pasuk is Teish V'Shivas Yamim. And we're going to learn something from this. We're going to explore this, and it's going to teach us something very fundamental about the Yom Tov of Sukkot. After Pasuk Karav L'Seif Parshas Hamayades, David Obnei Yisrael Lemer, B'chamisha Soyem L'chedesh Hashvi Yazeh Chag HaSukkos Shivas Yom LaHashem. State in Teras Kerim, the Teras Kerim, which is the Medrash on Parshas Vayikra, says as follows: Ma Talmud Lemer, what does this pasuk teach me? And as we'll see in a moment, he's referring here to the word Hasukos, Chag Hasukos. Why did it say Chag Hasukos? Since later on it's going to say that you should dwell in the Sukkah for 7 days, but it doesn't tell me which 7 days. Im Shiva Rishonim, if it's the first 7, meaning it's the same 7 as the Yom Tov of Sukkot. Im Shiva Achroinim, or is the next 7 days? But now when we open up this section and it says that these 7 days of Yom Tov are called Chag HaSukkos, this tells me that the eating in the Sukkah or the dwelling in the Sukkah is the same 7 days as the Yom Tov. Now, if you're trying to figure out what this means, because what does it mean the Yom Tov and eating in the Sukkah? Isn't it, or dwelling in the Sukkah? Isn't that the same thing? So in the brackets, the Rebbe explains it very elaborately. Before we learn Pshat, as the Shaila von Teras Kerim Mat Talmud Leimar is was steht in Pasuk der Losh Chag HaSukkos. The first of the Medrash explain that what's bothering the Medrash is, why does it say here Chag HaSukkos? Wie bald das in die Psukim steht bloß der Zivui von Mikra Kodesh. Kol Melechas Aveda Leisasu Karbanos HaChag. So let's break down the various details of Yom Tov. There's the fact that it's a Yom Tov. The fact that during these days there's no Melacha, and there are Karbanos that are being brought. So these are all elements of the Yom Tov. Under Tzivui of Yeshiva B'Sukkah, steht später b'Sefer Parsha. Another element of this Yom Tov is that we dwell in the Sukkah. That is not mentioned here. That's not mentioned till the end of this Parsha. So it should have defined this as a Yom Tov without associating it with Sukkot. Because there's other parts to the Yom Tov, and those are the ones that are being discussed here. So why do we say Chag HaSukkos? We don't even know yet that we're eating in the Sukkah or dwelling in the Sukkah. Teras Kerim explains as follows: the Fisher Nema. Yes, as the pasuk Sukkah states, Shivas Yom steht zum Sof Parsha. Noch dann wie steht früher in pasuk. B'chamisha Sim L'chedesh Hashvi Geimar. Techegu et Chag Hashem Shivas Yamim. In the pasuk right before the pasuk of Sukkah Teishvu. In pasuk, I think it's pasuk Mem Aleph. It says you should celebrate this Yom Tov for 7 days. Chukas Olam forever. B'chedesh Hashvi Techegu in the 7th month, and then it says Basukkos Teishvu. Weil wir nicht gewusst, zieh der Pasuk bei Sukkahs Teishu Shivas Yomim, meint dieselbe sein Yomim von dem Chag, Shiva Rishonim, annehmendig von Tesav Bechedisch, wegen welcher der Pasuk redt früher, oder als die sein Yomim von Yeshiva Sukkah, davon kommen Basunder, nach dem Chag Hashem Shivas Yomim, Shiva Achreinim, annehmendig von dem Tag nach die sein Yomim. So if we're looking at this as if there is a Yontif, regardless of what happens during that time, and then there are certain things that happen in that time, such as not doing melacha or something like that, then you're telling me that there has to be 7 days of eating in a sukkah, or dwelling in a sukkah. So I don't know, is the days of dwelling in the sukkah the same 7 days as the Chag that we just spoke about, and that too would begin on Tesvav on the 15th of Tishrei? Or when it comes to says Besukkahs Teishu Shivas Yomim, you should dwell in the sukkah for 7 days. It's a new 7 days. That for 7 days there's a yontif, and then after that begins another 7 days during which we dwell in the sukkah. Now, in your mind, it might be funny, because isn't that the whole thing of the yontif? And you would be right, because now we have the benefit of hindsight. But as I go into the psukim and I begin to learn the psukim, I don't have clarity yet. If it hadn't said the word Chag HaSukkos, if it just said Chag Shivas Yomim, as the Torah's Kohanim suggested, then I would know that there's a yontif. I would also know that I have to dwell in a sukkah for 7 days, but I wouldn't know that these two things are done concurrently. The Rebbe steht gleich bei Scholas HaParsha b'chamisha osar yom lachedesh hashvi hazeh Chag HaSukkah Shivas Yomim. They were right in the beginning. Many psukim before he introduces the concept of dwelling in the sukkah, he calls this yomtiv by the name of Chag HaSukkos, versus Megala, which tells us as der Basukkahs Teishu Shivas Yomim is in dem Zman von Zayin Yimei HaChag, that the 7 days of eating in the sukkah, of dwelling in the sukkah, are the same 7 days as this yomtiv, which is why we already refer to it now as Chag HaSukkos. So that's what the Torah's Kohanim is telling us. Now, when the pasuk says Chag HaSukkos, it's to tell us that the days of dwelling in the sukkah, which we're going to learn about later on, are the same days as this Chag, as this Yom Tiv, which begins on the 15th day of Tishrei. Now, this would imply, seemingly, that Sukkos, the mitzvah of dwelling in the sukkah, is not intrinsically connected to the Yom Tiv. Otherwise, how could you think that they're happening at two separate times? And the Rebbe is going to explain to us that that is not the case. From Pashtus Hadrash in Teras Kenim kommt es Tachera, as the mitzvah Besukkahs Teishu Shivas Yomim is nicht verbunden mit Netzma Chag und mit die übrigen Inyanim shebechag. This implies that the mitzvah of dwelling in the sukkah is not intrinsically connected with the essence of the Yom Tiv, or with the other elements that are in the Yom Tiv, and the Eshte Psukim, which are expressed right away in the first Psukim. On the first day is a holy day. To not do a malacha. That for 7 days you are to bring a carbon to Hashem. Nor is it intrinsically connected with the mitzvah of the Dalet Minim of the 4 species of shaking the lulav. But the Torah, which the Torah connects it with the Yom Tiv, by Yom Harishon, on the first day of this Yom Tiv, you should take these 4 species. So lulav is connected to Sukkahs, to the Yom Tiv, and dwelling in the Sukkah is not. So because I would think that the dwelling in the sukkah is its own thing, therefore I can even suggest that I shouldn't do it at the same time. The Torah lost nor heron, mitten zugeben den Wort HaSukkos, as the Peil is the Chag HaSukkos in dem Zman, Shivas Yom Hashem, v'chayben zecham b'chamisha in the Chedez HaShvi. And when the pasuk says HaSukkos, it's telling me it's happening concurrently. But from the very fact that I thought that it doesn't have to be concurrently, seemingly implies that the mitzvah of dwelling in the sukkah is not intrinsically connected with the Yom Tiv. But the Rebbe says that cannot be the pshat. Man von dem Gufa, was die Torah ist mit dir dem Zman von Besukkahs Teishu. Nicht durch ein anderer Öfen, nur durch dem was die Shivas Yom Hashem ruft sie an Chag HaSukkos. So says the Rebbe that from the fact that the way the Torah tells us that the dwelling in the sukkah is happening at the same time as the Yom Tiv, by calling the Yom Tiv Chag HaSukkos, is moving as the mitzvah for Yeshiva Sukkah is nit place chal in the mizmah from the Chag. This tells us that the mitzvah of dwelling in the Sukkah, it's not randomly that it happens to come out in the same time as the Chag. The fact that the way the Torah tells it to us is by saying Chag HaSukkos, the Yomtiv of Sukkos, where it's seemingly connecting the two. The Chag with the dwelling in the Sukkah implies that they are intrinsically connected. Nachmar additionally, Vivalda says their shame from them Chag is move on, and because this becomes the name of the Yomtiv, anytime there's a name, as the Rebbe explains so many times, the name defines the essence. So if we're calling the Chag by the name of Sukkot, it must mean that the dwelling in the Sukkah is intrinsically connected to the Chag. However, the fees are not verstehen, but according to this, we have two questions. Aleph, is in Pasuk Nitakin Adgasha, even just by saying in these 7 days, that we should, why doesn't the pasuk Basukkah Teishu, which is the pasuk that introduces the concept of dwelling in the sukkah, why does it not indicate to us that we're talking about the same 7 days? We just spent a bunch of psukim talking about a chag that's going to be for 7 days, starting with 15th day of Tishrei. And Sukkah says, dwell in the Sukkah for 7 days, without any indication that we're talking about these same 7 days of the Chag. If they're so intrinsically connected, as we just explained, why not make that connection in the words of the Psukim? Even by just saying the words, B'shivas hayomim, not for 7 days, but in these 7 days. Base. Why Taki does the pasuk push it off so long? Why not tell us immediately that there's a chag for 7 days and you should dwell in the sukkah for 7 days? Especially since that is the style of the pasuk, the layout of the pasuk, when it comes to the first Yom Tov, the Yom Tov of Pesach. On the 15th day of this month, the month of Nisan, is Chag HaMatzos, the festival of the matzos. Shivas Yom Matzos Techelu, for 7 days you should eat matzos. And only after that do you bring up the other elements of the Yom Tov, which is that it's a holy day and to not do malacha and to bring karbanos in these 7 days. So why couldn't we do the same thing by Sukkot? The whole reason why we had a problem, why we thought and had to say Chag HaSukkos, is because I would think that they're not intrinsically connected. Why not? Because the Sukkot Teisho comes much later in the Psukim. Why not do it the same way you did it for Pesach? Introduce the Yom Tov and immediately tell us that we're going to be dwelling in the Sukkah for 7 days. So, we did establish that despite the fact that it seems from the suggestion that dwelling in the sukkah is not intrinsically part of sukkahs, of the chag, nevertheless, from the fact that it's called Chag HaSukkos, ultimately, this teaches us that dwelling in the sukkah is an intrinsic part of the Yom Tov, of the Chag. The question then becomes, why doesn't it tell us Basukkos Teishvu and connect these 7 days with the 7 days of the Chag? And why, when it introduces the Chag, does it not tell us to dwell in the Sukkah for 7 days right away? So we're going to begin to explain this by first introducing, according to Nigla, the connection between the mitzvah of Sukkah and mitzvah of Lulav. In the parsha angeteilt von Chag HaSukkos. Verbindet es aber die Torah mit Chag Hashem Shivas Yomim nicht wie Sukkah. Which, despite the fact that also Lulav is not brought up immediately in the parsha, nevertheless, right before it says the mitzvah of Lulav, it says Chag Hashem Shivas Yomim. Usmachtem lefnei Hashem Elokechem Shivas Yomim. And the Torah connects the mitzvah of Lulav with the Yom Tov of Sukkot, with the Chag. So we know that those two things are connected. But we're going to see a deeper connection. That Alter Rebbe zagt b'Sidurei, as mitzvahs netilase from Lulav v'Sukkah mitzvah. Alter Rebbe writes in the Siddur that to do the mitzvah of Lulav while being in the Sukkah, that is the best way of doing the mitzvah. This is seemingly something that stems from Kabbalah, from mysticism. And the source of it is in the writings of the Arizal, which are Kabbalah. Aber Yeshleimar, as I say, the Al Inyanim and Kabbalah and Pnimis HaTorah, hat eich das amakar v'asbar al pi nikla. But we must suggest that just like everything else that we always say that if it's brought into if it's brought in Kabbalah, it has a parallel to it in Nigla the Torah. So there must be an explanation al pi Nigla why the best way to do the mitzvah of lulav is in the sukkah. Befrat as der alte Rebbe is meshana von dem Lashon was steht in Kisvei Arizal. Toiv levarich, chulu v'kayetz b'zeh, und schreibt mitzvah min ha-muvchar, especially since the alte Rebbe changes the wording of the Kisvei Arizal and says mitzvah min ha-muvchar, which is more of a halachic terminology. So we therefore must conclude that it has a biur, it has an explanation al pi nigla. So in Sif Dal, the Rebbe is going to suggest that the connection is, because since you have to do everything in the sukkah, so it enhances the mitzvah by also doing the mitzvah of lulav in the sukkah. The Rebbe is going to say that can't be the only explanation, because that's more about sukkah than it is about lulav. And the Alter Rebbe says mitzvah min ha-muvchar about lulav, not about sukkah. Let's suggest that the reason why this is mitzvah and muvchar, this is the best way to do the mitzvah, is because of the mitzvah of sukkah. Yes, the mitzvah from sukkah is tishvu kein taduru, since the mitzvah is that you should dwell in the sukkah as the way you live in your house. You eat and you drink and you sleep, v'yitayel, and you relax, v'dor b'sukkah, and you dwell in the sukkah. Kol zayin hayom b'mayim v'layla, all 7 days, night and day. As one does in their own home. Everything that you do only in your house, so you should do it in your sukkah. And therefore it becomes necessary al pi halacha to find a reason why it's okay to learn outside of the sukkah. Because really, everything you do, especially your learning, should be in the sukkah. So obviously, also lulav is one of the things that your person is doing during the days of sukkahs. It should be done in the sukkah. If you're living in the sukkah, then everything, including the mitzvah of lulav, is done in the sukkah. Especially that the fact that it's a mitzvah makes it chashuv. It gives it a sense of importance. And therefore it is a firm part of the yomtiv. So therefore, if relaxing, which is a random thing that's not a necessary thing to do, but if you're doing it, it should be done in the sukkah, then certainly lulav, which is a mitzvah, and therefore something of importance, certainly should be done in the sukkah. So that's the first suggestion. That since the sukkah is teshvu came to duru, that you dwell in the sukkah with everything that you do. So lulav is one of the things that you do, and it's actually one of the important things that you do. Certainly should be done in the sukkah. From them, but says the Rebbe, no, that can't be the whole thing, because number one, the Alter Rebbe writes this amongst the dinim of lulav. The mitzvah of bringing the lulav into the sukkah. Where he's emphasizing the mitzvah of lulav is This implies to us that bringing the lulav into the sukkah is not just an improvement in the mitzvah of sukkah, it's an improvement to the mitzvah of lulav. And by the way, the Rebbe is going to say that it makes a big difference. If you say that the mitzvah min ha-muvchar of bringing the lulav into the sukkah is a detail in sukkah, or it's a detail in lulav, actually has halachic relevance. Between these two explanations, whether you say that it's an improvement to the mitzvah of lulav, or you say that it's an improvement to the mitzvah of sukkah, there actually would be a halachic difference. In falvim is pater in a sukkah, in a case where a person is pater from sukkah. For example, when it is raining. But some mitzvah pater in a sukkah. The din is that if somebody is uncomfortable in the sukkah, he's pater from the sukkah, because just like if you were uncomfortable in your house, you would leave your house. So too, if you're uncomfortable in your sukkah, you can go out of the sukkah. Of course, the minik Chabad is to eat in the sukkah regardless, but al pi halacha, the halacha is that when it's raining, one is pater from sukkah. So even lulav sukkah is beleza mitzvah amuvcher in mitzvah sukkah. If the bringing the lulav into the sukkah would be an improvement only in the mitzvah of sukkah, just like all the other parts of the person's day that he does in the sukkah, with which we fulfill the mitzvah of dwelling in the sukkah, is based as pater from sukkah. So when the mitzvah of sukkah is not applicable. For example, that it's raining. And he doesn't have to wait for the rain to stop in order to do his lulav. Because right now there's no obligation to eat in the sukkah or to dwell in the sukkah. Just like a person doesn't have to wait to eat or drink, you don't have to wait to eat or drink until the rain stops, besides for the first night, possibly. Because once it's a case of mitzvah, the mitzvah of sukkah doesn't apply, and therefore you would not have to wait with a lulav. But if bringing the lulav into the sukkah is an improvement to the mitzvah of lulav, in that case, even right now when it's raining, there's no obligation to be in the sukkah. But since the mitzvah of lulav still continues to be applicable, in sukkah, and the most perfect way of doing it is in the sukkah, then I would think that a person should better wait until the rain stops in order to fulfill this mitzvah of taking the lulav in the sukkah was a mitzvah muvcha, which is the best way of doing this mitzvah. And the Rabbi brings in the Haris that it's not an issue of mitzvah of zrizn makdimin, because since the zrizn makdimin, which means that it's better to do the mitzvah right away, because if you could do the mitzvah in a better way, then the mitzvah min hamuvchar overrides the zrizn makdimin. It overrides the importance of doing a mitzvah right away. So if you say that there's a prat in lulav, there's an element within lulav, that it's a better way to do lulav by being in the sukkah, which we haven't yet explained how that is, but then that would mean that if it's raining outside and you can't get into the sukkah, it might be better to wait until the rain stops, until you can get into the sukkah and do the mitzvah of lulav. So now comes back to our original question: what is the connection between the mitzvah of sukkah and the mitzvah of lulav? That because of that, the Alter Rebbe writes that a person that the best way to do the mitzvah of lulav is in the sukkah. Now we're going to begin to understand what makes up the Yom Tov of Sukkot. How does it become a Yom Tov? And we're going to contrast it with the Yom Tov of Pesach, and it's going to clarify to us a lot, including the answers to all of our questions. The beer is as follows. Parsha and Parsha Meid is now a parsha when it discusses the Yom Tovim. We find two Yom Tovim that the Yom Tov is identified with its own name. For example, the Yom Tov of Shavuos is not referred to as Shavuos, Chag HaShavuos. It's not mentioned that way in the Torah. We say it that way in davening, but the Torah, and even Rosh Hashanah, it's not called Rosh Hashanah in the Torah. But two Yom Tovim are defined by a special name, Chag HaMatzos and Chag HaSukkos. But there are differences between the two. So we're going to discuss now Chag HaMatzos, which is known as Pesach, and Chag HaSukkos, which is known as Sukkos. Aleph, B'Chag HaMatzos state, U'B'chamisha Asher Yom L'Chedesh Hazeh, Chag HaMatzos L'Hashem. On the 15th day is Chag HaMatzos. The Shem Chag HaMatzos steht nicht b'shayches zu alle 7 Tag, but it doesn't say it about all 7 days. It just says on the 15th day is Chag HaMatzos. Und b'Chag HaSukkos steht Chag HaSukkos Shivas Yom L'Hashem. The Yom Tov Sukkos is for 7 days. So this is one difference. Difference number one. That by Pesach, it only refers it to Chag HaMatzos on the 15th day. By Sukkos, it says clearly the Chag HaSukkos is for 7 days. Beis L'idach, conversely, by Pesach, right away, as soon as it identifies the Yom Tov as Chag HaMatzos, immediately it says for 7 days you should eat matzos. Whereas by Sukkos, it doesn't mention the mitzvah of dwelling in the sukkah right away, as we mentioned earlier, but next to Yom Tov, next to the name Chag HaSukkos, but it's brought much later in the parsha. So to explain this, we could look at one more difference between these two Yom Tovim. Chag HaMatzos werd beloshen Chazal und euch in dem Loschen Amurgel bebinig Yisrael beloshen ben Yadam angerufen euch mit einander namen Chag HaPesach. The Yom Tov of Chag HaMatzos is found in the words of Chazal as well as in the what is accepted amongst people, we also refer to it as Pesach. In Take and Davening, we say Chag HaMatzos. But when we talk to each other, or even when we learn Masechta Pesachim, or we learn Halacha, it's called Pesach. Mashenki mechag HaSukkos, gefindt man nicht, als man soll im Anruf miteinander nehmen. But Chag HaSukkos, we don't find, when we talk about it, generally speaking, to use another name for it. Wird mit denselben Namen angerufen, bechazal of Minig Yisrael. Whether we're learning about it in Masechta Sukkah, whether we are discussing it, where you're going for Sukkahs, or what you're doing for Sukkahs, everyone calls it Sukkahs. We call it alles verstandig. So from this we can understand, as the Teuchen from dem ganzen Chag, HaPesach, was steht nicht im Ganzen in dem, was es Chag HaMatzos. Mashenki mechag HaSukkos is das Sukkahs to Teuchen HaKag. From the fact that the Chag HaMatzos is also called Pesach, this implies to us that matzah is only a detail in the Yom Tov. It's not the definition of the entire Yom Tov, whereas Sukkahs, because that is the only name of the Yom Tov, the dwelling in the Sukkah is the mainstay of the whole Yom Tov. Underriber. And this will also explain why. When the Torah says that this day is called Chag HaMatzos, the pasuk has to right away explain that we're going to be eating matzahs for 7 days. As nor zu lieb dem prat von achilas matzah, wird angerufen Chag HaMatzos. It's only for this reason that we're calling it Chag HaMatzos. If the whole Yom Tov is about matzah, then you don't need to say anything. Chag HaMatzos, because that's what the whole Yom Tov is about. But since it's not really all about the matzah, therefore we have to say, in that case, why are you calling it Chag HaMatzos? Because we're eating matzah for 7 days. And that's why it doesn't even say with regards to, it doesn't even call it Chag HaMatzos with regards to all 7 days. Because Chag HaMatzos is not intrinsically connected to the Yom Tov of Pesach. Whereas when it comes to the 15th day of Tishrei, is Chag HaSukkah Shivas Yom Lashem, das is der Teuchen von dem Chag von Shivas Yomim. What is the main point of this Yom Tov HaSukkos? That for 7 days we're going to be dwelling in the Sukkah. Times the Gufa steht nicht der Tzivi v'Sukkah steht Shivas Yom gleich noch Chag HaSukkos Kanal, which is why the mitzvah of a Sukkah's Teshvu is postponed until later on. We want to define that Sukkahs is all about dwelling in the Sukkah. And if it's said right away B'Sukkah's Teshvu, then I would think that it's only a detail, and it's coming right away to explain to us why I'm calling it Chag HaSukkos. By postponing the words B'Sukkah's Teshvu to later, while at the same time already saying Chag HaSukkos, it's telling us that the Chag HaSukkos is that the Chag and the HaSukkos are intrinsically connected. I don't need an explanation that I'm calling it Sukkos because of B'Sukkah's Teshvu. No, it's called Chag HaSukkos because Chag and HaSukkos are intrinsically connected. They're one thing. That is the Teichen of the Chag. So with this, we already answered our questions. Not yet the eating, not yet the lulav part, but the first two questions that we asked. Why does the Torah? Let me go back to the questions here. Why does it say? We didn't answer all the questions, but question Beis, which was why does the Torah not say B'Sukkah's Teshuvah Shivas Yom right away? It's very simple. By Pesach, matzah is just a detail in the Yom Tov, and therefore the Torah. The Rabbi is going to explain this in the next seif, very very beautifully. But what we know right now is that the detail of matzah is not an intrinsic detail not an intrinsic part of the mitzvah of the Yom Tov of Pesach, which is why we don't call it Chag HaMatzos. Generally, we call it Pesach, and therefore the Torah has to explain to us right away, why do I eat matzah? Why do I call it Chag HaMatzos? Because I eat matzah for 7 days. When it comes to Sukkahs, the Sukkahs is called Sukkahs because the aspect of Sukkah is an intrinsic part of the Yom Tov, and therefore I don't say right away B'Sukkah's Teshvu, because then I would have thought that Sukkahs is only a detail. That Torah say, why am I calling Chag HaSukkos? Because we're going to be eating in the Sukkah. So Torah says, no, let's push off that part. Let's say Chag HaSukkos without any explanation to tell us that the Chag is Sukkos. Sukkah is the Iker Teichen, the main a point of the Yom Tov. And now we go back to Sivav the Asbar Bazah. What is Pshat? What does it mean that by Sukkah, by Pesach, matzah is only a detail, and by Sukkah, dwelling in the Sukkah is the very definition of the Yom Tov? What is Pshat? The Asbar Bazah. The Yom Chamish Ashel Chedesh Nisan is getelled. The 15th day of Nisan is inherently a special, unique time. And not because that's when the mitzvah of matzah was given. Nor does the Yom Tov was at the time. But it's because that's the day the Yidden went out of Mitzrayim. And therefore it becomes a celebration. And this day should be remembered. You should celebrate this as a Yom Tov for Hashem for all generations. Und das says a Yom Tov as Mami Yuchid is the Sibit to the mitzvah Shabbai. Koilo the mitzvah of Achidus Matzah. And because it's a Yom Tov, therefore there are certain mitzvahs that are given to be done on that day, including the mitzvah of Matzah. In other words, what makes the 15th day of Nisan holy? The fact that we went out of Mitzrayim. That is the cause of the various different things that we do on that day. Whereas when you talk about the 7 days that begin on the 15th day of Tishrei, is not inherently holy or special. It's not like anything happened on that day. What makes it holy is the fact that we're doing a mitzvah on that day, on those days that we're dwelling in the Sukkah. Yes, as in the Shivas Yom is not the mitzvah in Shivas Sukkah, since these 7 days have a mitzvah to dwell in the Sukkah. Especially since this is a mitzvah that entirely envelops the person and all of his things. For these 7 days, Teishvu came to Durukanal, like we said before, that it says that Teishvu means that you have to dwell. Kinala, that is Dor, Besukkah, Kol Zayin, Yom Ben Yemim Ben Laila, that he's dwelling in the Sukkah 7 days and nights. That is what makes these 7 days special. So it's going the other way. When you're starting, on Pesach, what happened is on the 15th day of Nisan, the Yidden went on Mitzrayim. Therefore, it became a Yom Tov. The Yom Tov, therefore, necessitates certain things, including eating matzah. On Sukkot is the opposite. On Sukkot, there's a mitzvah to dwell in the Sukkah. That's what makes this day into a celebration. To say the same thing, but from a different, in a different perspective. But yeah, the Shabbos Yom Tov Zakman B'Tfilah Zechel Tzis Mitzrayim. Every Shabbos on Yom Tov, you say Zechel Tzis Mitzrayim. That we're always remembering Tzis Mitzrayim. As is our da in the Machilek. B'Chag HaPesach is das Valzacher as Hayem Hazeh Asher Yitzosem Mitzrayim. On Pesach, it's this very day that you went out of Mitzrayim. Which therefore you should celebrate it through other generations. As we said before, remembering the day of Yom Tov, the fact that on today the Yidden went out of Mitzrayim, that's what makes this Yom Tov. Whereas when it comes to Shabbos and Shavuos, it didn't happen on that day. And even more so b'Chag HaSukkos. Zog the Torah, l'man yehu derisechem, ki b'Sukkos say shaftes b'nei Yisrael, v'etzias Mitzrayim. So Yidden should know that I placed them in the Sukkos, when they were going out of Mitzrayim. They says Chachas, das is nicht in dem Zman from the Sukkos shaftes b'nei Yisrael. Even though this is not the time of the year when this actually happened, that the Yidden were placed into the Sukkos, whether it means Sukkos literally, or whether it means the Anadei HaKavod, the clouds of glory with which the Yidden went out of Mitzrayim. Und die Torah sagt dem Tam, nicht wenn die Torah sagt on dem Tzivui HaChag with Chilas HaParsha. And the Torah mentions this not at the very beginning when it introduces the Yom Tov. Nor if they're mitzvah Sukkah Teisha Shivas Yamim. It's only later when it says you should dwell in the Sukkah for 7 days. He says because when you went out of Mitzrayim, we went in Sukkahs. V'adrabah, mitzadem v'dos is davke nid meya aviv in the zman for Yitzis Mitzrayim is demol the mitzvah in Yeshiva Sukkah and the Chag HaSukkos v'yizakt in Tur. And as the Tur tells us that the Yom Tov of dwelling in the Sukkah is specifically not in the time in the spring, which is the time when the Yidden went out of Mitzrayim. We wanted to know that the Yidden are doing it for the sake of the mitzvah, and therefore it was scheduled in the time of the fall, in autumn. So from this we see that the time that we're dealing with is not Zeichel Atzias Mitzrayim. It's the fact that we're dwelling in the Sukkah that creates the Zeichel Atzias Mitzrayim, and that creates the holiness of these days. Al Pize is moving. So this is the fundamental nekuda here. That when it comes to the Yom Tov of Pesach, the day is inherently holy. And because of that, we do various different things, including matzah. When it comes to Sukkot, the day is not inherently holy. We are making the day holy by dwelling in the Sukkah. Al Pize is moving. Aditzivui menegei achag uprato v'shteim tchalot parsha. B'yem arishim mikakedesh kum lachas v'leisasu. Shivas yom takrivui shel Hashem v'geimar. Zayne nitkim azundere inyanim. So now, if we are making the Yom Tov of Sukkot, then when it comes to the various elements of the Yom Tov, that is at the holy day, and then we don't do malacha, and then we bring karbanes, they're not separate elements. That have no connection with the obligation of dwelling in the Sukkah. As we originally thought that Sukkah was its own thing, a separate thing. What makes the Yom Tov? The fact that we dwell in the Sukkah. And therefore it's called Chag HaSukkos. So then the idea of Sukkah now includes in it all the various details. Just to clarify what we mean by that, let's contrast it back to Pesach. When it comes to Pesach, which as we explained, is the Yom Tov, independent of the mitzvah of eating matzah. Sein die alle in Jahren das was ist Mikro Kedesh der Zivik vom Kamalacha Leisasu und die Akravas Akabanas Meshach Shivas Meachag nicht verbunden mit Ninyan Amatzes Shabbai. Never that's the Chag. All the other elements are connected with the very Yom Tov of Pesach and not so much with matzah. In other words, when it comes to Pesach, that Pesach and Matzah are two separate things, so to speak. They're independent of each other. Pesach is inherently holy, and then the Eibusha tells us we should eat Matzah on that holy day. Then the rest, the other elements that make up the Yom Tov of Pesach are not intrinsically connected to the mitzvah of Matzah. But by Sukkot, the whole Yom Tov is made up by the mitzvah of dwelling in the Sukkah. So automatically all the other parts of Yom Tov are also connected with the mitzvah of dwelling in the Sukkah. And now we're going to go back to the mitzvah of lulav. Now that we understand that all the parts of Yom Tov are intrinsically connected to Sukkah, it'll make sense why the mitzvah of lulav is best done in the Sukkah. Now is moving mitzvah von yeshiva v'sukkah und the shaychis von mitzvah to the mitzvah of Sukkah. So according to this, we'll now understand the connection between the mitzvah of lulav and the mitzvah of Sukkah. Kanal is beim Zivi besukkes Teisvu Shivas Yamim nicht gesagt geworden besukkes Teisvu bis Shivas Yamim. Da seinen von früher sein im Echag. Oh, so here the Rebbe also answers our other question. Why later when it says besukkes Teisvu Shivas Yamim does the Torah not reference that these 7 days are the same 7 days of the Chag? Because that would mean that these 7 days are Yom Tov even before the mitzvah of Sukkah. Is neither far but does on Shivas Mechag nor Lahepech. The Torah doesn't want to say B'Shivas Hayamim, which would imply that there's already 7 holy days of Chag, and during those days we're going to eat in the Sukkah or dwell in the Sukkah. Fakert, the Torah wants to tell us that Sukkah is what makes up the Yom Tov. Besukkah's Teisvu macht gede zayin v'yachaken al barucha. Besukkah's Teisvu creates the Shivas Yamim. So bis Shivas Hayamim would imply that there already are 7 days that are Yom Tov, and during these days we dwell in the Sukkah. And the Torah clearly just doesn't want to give up that message, because what makes the Yom Tov of Sukkot is the dwelling in the Sukkah. And therefore it says Besukkah Teisvu Shivas Yamim ve'al pi ze yumtik lashon Rashi b'negei Shmini Atzeres. Parenthetically speaking, this will make it geschmack a lashon and Rashi with regards to Shmini Atzeres. If that was the Gemara sagt as is regel b'fnei atzmai, that the Gemara says that despite the fact that it's called by Yom HaShmini, it is the 8th day, nevertheless it's its own Yom Tov, all getelt from Chag HaSukkos, independent of Sukkos. Taich Rashi, she'ein yoshim b'Sukkah. Says Rashi, because we don't dwell in the Sukkah. The regel from Chag HaSukkos is their mesuva v'inyan from Yeshiva b'Sukkah, because the Yom Tov of Sukkos is a outcome of the dwelling in the Sukkah. The very Yom Tov is defined by the fact that we are dwelling in the Sukkah. And since on Shmini Atzeres we don't dwell in the Sukkah, that is the proof that it's a regel of Ne'atah, that it's its own Yom Tov. Now it makes it so geschmack. Yumtak. once we understand that the yeshiva b'sukkah is what defines the Yom Tov, what makes the Yom Tov, then on another day that you don't have a mitzvah to be in the sukkah, then obviously that's not part of this Yom Tov. Besignen nachher, der Chag wird aufgetan durch der Yeshiva b'sukkah Shivas Yom Tov Teis v'kein taduru. The Yom Tov is being created by the dwelling in the sukkah. When a person dwells in the sukkah for 7 days, that's what makes the Yom Tov. So now we understand this even deeper. That B'sukkah Teis Shivas Yomim, it's not B'shivas HaYomim, the 7 days that are already holy because Hashem defined them as Chag. B'sukkah Teis Shivas Yomim, by dwelling in the sukkah for 7 days, we create this Yom Tov of Sukkahs. And now, let's understand how this applies to Lulav. L'idach ba'lulav shteitu l'kachtadach b'yem harishon. Lulav, it says you should take the Lulav on the first day. The mitzvah for Netilas Lulav is vile, das is Yom Harishon l'chag Sukkahs. Lulav is a detail in Sukkahs. What makes the Yom Tov Sukkah, the dwelling in the Sukkah? Lulav is a detail, is an element of this mitzvah. Ubemele is move on, as this man mitzvah, the shem mitzvah of the Dalad Minim, is chal b'yom harishon. When does the mitzvah, when is it considered a mitzvah? When does the Lulav become holy? On the first day. The Kedushas Chag HaSukkos is Geirem, the Mechiv Shemitzvah Aleim. It is the sanctity of Sukkos, of the Yom Tov Sukkos, and this actually has halachic ramifications. That before Yom Tov, a Hadas has no, any of the 4 minim, have no holiness to them, other than the fact that you paid a lot of money. But other than that, it's not inherently holy until the first day of Yom Tov, until you have the Kedusha of Chag HaSukkos, which was made up by the dwelling in the Sukkah. That's what classifies the Daled Minim, the Lulav and the Esrik and the Hadas and the Arava as something that is holy and something that is a mitzvah. And since what makes the Lulav is the holiness of the Yom Tov, and what makes the Yom Tov the dwelling in the Sukkah. Move on. As a menemt Lulav b'Sukkah, that when we're doing the mitzvah of Lulav in the Sukkah, it's not just a detail within the mitzvah of Taduru, that this is how I'm dwelling in the Sukkah, by one of the ways, by making the bracha and doing the mitzvah of Lulav. Most of them come to in mitzvah Sukkah, which that would be an improvement in the mitzvah of Sukkah. That the sadin in until is Lulav. It's actually an element, a din in Lulav. It is Moshe Shleimus and the M'shem v'kiyim a mitzvah from Lulav, mitzvah and a mufcher. What made the Lulav a mitzvah? The Yom Tov of Sukkos. What makes the Yom Tov of Sukkos? The dwelling in the Sukkah. So when I dwell in the Sukkah, by making the bracha, by doing the mitzvah of Lulav, I am enhancing the mitzvah of Lulav. And therefore, it's not just an element in the mitzvah of Sukkah, it is an element in the mitzvah of Lulav. It is an improvement to the mitzvah of Lulav that I'm fulfilling the Taduru, that I'm creating the Yom Tov. I'm making it into a Yom Tov by doing the mitzvah of Lulav in the Sukkah. That's the ultimate way of doing it. So this answers the question. Why the Alpin Nigla? Why does the Alter Rebbe say mitzvah and amuvcher? Because since the whole Yom Tov is made up by eating in the Sukkah, or dwelling in the Sukkah rather, since the whole Yom Tov is made up by dwelling in the Sukkah, so therefore, and the mitzvah of Lulav is created by the mitzvah of Sukkahs, which is made up by the mitzvah of Sukkah, so therefore, it means that the Sukkah enhances the mitzvah of Lulav. So this explains to us why by Yom Tov of Sukkahs, the Torah is structured the way it is. Why doesn't it say right away Besukkahs Teis Shivas Yomim? Because it wants us to know that Besukkahs Teis is not just a detail. That the reason we shouldn't think that the reason it's called Chag HaSukkos is because we're eating in the Sukkah, and that Sukkah is only a detail. But we should know that Sukkah is the main element of the Yom Tov. And that's why it doesn't say B'Shivas HaYamim to imply that there's already 7 holy days, because the Sukkah is what makes these days holy. And this is why the Lulav is best done in the Sukkah, because since the Lulav is a prat in the Chag, and the Chag is made up by Yeshiva B'Sukkah, so therefore if the Lulav is done in the Sukkah, it enhances the mitzvah of Lulav. And this gives us a whole new understanding in the mitzvah, into the Yom Tov of Sukkahs. Why the Torah lays it out the way it does. And the fact that despite the fact that there's nothing special, so to speak, about the 15th day or about these 7 days in the month, we, Yidden, Klal Yisrael, make these days holy by dwelling in the Sukkah. Now we're going to go to the biur, on a deeper level, and how this applies to each and every one of us. As this man von Chamishas Lachedes Shvi Hazeh, Vert HaChag mitzad the mitzvah von Besukah Tishris Yamim, that the 15th day of Tishrei becomes a Yom Tiv through the mitzvah of dwelling in the Sukkah, is in dem da maila legabi dem was bechag matzah is mamuvdul mitzatzmei, actually has an advantage over the Yom Tiv of Pesach, which is inherently already holy. You would think, look at this, Pesach, before you do anything, it's already a holy day. It's Zeichel Tziyas Mitzrayim. Shaking Sukkah is just a regular day, unless I'm dwelling in the Sukkah. So the Rebbe says maybe it's fakert. Maybe there's a maila in Sukkahs in the fact that it doesn't have a pre-designated holiness. Because when it comes to Sukkahs, the sanctity of the Yom Tiv is being created by the person's efforts. So it actually has an impact on the world. Because it's having an impact on the world. Zman, time is part of the world. And the person, the Yid who's keeping the mitzvah of Sukkahs, is actually taking this time, which is inherently mundane, and is sanctifying it. It affects the time as it is without it previously being connected to holiness. But when it comes to Pesach, where the time has already been separated, designated as something holy, it doesn't have the same impact on the Gashmias. We're not doing anything to the Gashmias. The Eibishter did it. The Eibishter made this day holy because we took us out of Mitzrayim on that day. But when it comes to Sukkahs, when Yidden do the mitzvah of Sukkah, they are elevating and sanctifying this previously mundane section of time. And because of that, we see a difference in the mitzvah of the day, Chilas Matzah, when you shiva b'sukkah. Chilas Matzah is not a Chilas shel mitzvah. Es nitkin achila was aval gitam b'lavachi, nit b'shum mitzvah. Eating matzah, the whole eating is a mitzvah. Meaning to say that we're doing it only for the mitzvah. We wouldn't necessarily be eating matzah on the first day of Pesach, on the first night of Pesach, if the Eibusher didn't say to eat matzah. The mitzvah yeshiva b'sukkah is as nit in yanim mechudashim. Mitzvah. The act of the person, he's eating, he's drinking, he's sleeping, he's whatever it is. The act that he's doing is not things that he's doing for the mitzvah. The whole idea is that you're dwelling in the sukkah as like you dwell in your house. In Yonavas Ge'edin, Seder Achayim from Yedin mentioned things that are part of the daily order of a person's life. Not necessarily being connected to Yiddishkeit or to Torah mitzvahs. Person eats. Eating is not inherently, intrinsically connected to Yiddishkeit. And he takes these mundane things and he does a mitzvah with it. The matzah, the act of eating, is because Hashem said so. The sukkah, the act of eating, is because he's hungry. Where is he eating it? He's eating it in the sukkah, so he's taking this mundane act of eating when he's hungry, and he's doing a mitzvah with it. And this is the uniqueness of sukkahs. All year, we have to work really hard to take our deeds and do them for the sake of heaven, or to know Hashem in everything that we do, or everywhere we go. When es kommt aber Chag HaSukkos wird aufgetan als kol anogesa von chayav yem k'meshem sein an initial mitzvah. When it comes to Sukkos, you have the advantage that every single thing that he does, every mundane part of his life, becomes a mitzvah. In other words, during the year when you eat lunch, so the eating of lunch is not a mitzvah. If you eat it with the right kavanah, that you're going to use it to serve Hashem, etc., then you elevate the food. When it comes to the mitzvah of Sukkos, the very fact that you're eating in the sukkah, without any kavanis and without any efforts, the fact that you're eating in the sukkah, you're taking your lunch, your mundane act, and it becomes a mitzvah. And because of that, you see it also in the physical sense. That the entire person, from head to toe, with his clothing, with his baggage, are all inside the sukkah. Was bei kein andere Mitzvah gewinnen nicht, dass die ganze Mitzvah seine und alle seine Inyonim sollen sein herumgeringelt von der Mitzvah von der Eibishten. In no other Mitzvah do we find that the entire person with all of his accoutrements should be surrounded by a Mitzvah of the Eibishter. A lot of times people say, what about mikveh? And in mikveh, a person is undressed. It's just a person. He leaves his clothes behind. He leaves whatever else behind. The person goes into the mikveh. In the sukkah, the person goes with his clothes, with his dirty shoe, the mud on the shoes, with his satchel, with everything. The entire person, with everything that comes along with it. The good and the heipech hagud. It all goes inside the sukkah. Because the sukkah is elevating the person. It's making the person and all of his parts, all the parts of him, holy. So that's the idea of Pnimis Yonim. The difference between Pesach and Sukkot. Pesach is the Eibush that gives us a mitzvah to do this, so we do it because the Eibush said so. Sukkot, we're doing mundane things, but we're doing it in a holy way. In dem Alter Rabbi Moshe Madgis as mitzvah natilas lulav b'sukkah is mitzvah menamufcha from lulav. Then, as we said, we explained it al pi nigla. Now we're going to explain it b'avedas Adam. Now the Alter Rebbe adds and highlights that the mitzvah of lulav should be done in the sukkah is an improvement to the mitzvah of lulav. And the quote is, "Lafichach ba'bayker kaidim sheyisfalel b'eidei b'sukkah." Therefore, in the morning before davening, when he's still in the sukkah, yivarech, he should make the bracha on the lulav. But the bracha is al natilas lulav. It's not just a bracha on the sukkah, leishiv b'sukkah. When it comes to lulav, I'm making a bracha on the lulav, but the Alter Rebbe is saying it's best done in the sukkah. One might think that there's necessity to be enveloped with the mitzvah of sukkah, which means to be enveloped by the will of Hashem, is relevant to those that are immersed or involved in physical things, material things. But not to those that are in the category of the lulav, which, as Chazal explain, the lulav, each of the four species has its own unique characteristics. The palm branch has taste. The palm has the date has taste. So the lulav represents someone who learns Torah. So you would think that maybe he doesn't have to be in the sukkah. Because they are constantly connected to Hashem through the learning of Torah. So therefore they don't need the sukkah. They already have the holiness. Now that it's called Adam, and so too when it comes to a regular person, he could think to himself. I understand that when it comes to my eating or drinking, it should be inside of and enveloped by this mitzvah of sukkah, because it's something mundane. I have to make it holy. But why would I think that the mitzvah of sukkah has to encompass even my learning of Torah? And Mustaka Eich Mekayim Zay mitzvahs. He knows that he has to do the mitzvahs. Because if somebody says, I'm only going to learn Torah and not do the mitzvahs, then even the Torah he doesn't truly have, because Torah and mitzvahs have to go together. Was Gidre is Taduru, Arum dimension in Gansen. But that would be an element in Sukkah. That since the Sukkah has to envelop the person entirely, it has to envelop even the learning of the person. But I wouldn't think that as a part of my learning, I have to do it in the Sukkah. I would understand that I have to do mitzvahs. That means to say that a person has to be that a person has to be entirely permeated with the Eibishter. But when it comes to my learning, which is the mitzvah of lulav in the parable, then it doesn't have to be enveloped by the sukkah. Because by learning Torah, I'm already connected to the Eibishter. Zakman, therefore the Alter Rebbe comes and says as mitzvahs netilas b'sukkah is mitzvah ben amufcha, that to take the lulav, to do the mitzvah of lulav, the best way to do it is in the sukkah. Das is negeya to zayin avana v'asaka b'teira, doing it in the sukkah, meaning to say having it enveloped by the Eibishter's ratzon elyon actually affects the way you understand and learn Torah. And nemt chachmas ha-Torah, was is chachmas tzin shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He internalizes the will and the wisdom of Hashem. When er derhert, when his margish as das was lernt, is an inyan was as in makif, when is be'ein arech for him. When can he truly internalize what he's learning? when he recognizes is that that this learning has to entirely encompass him, and that it is entirely higher than him, incomparably higher than him. Because only then does he have the proper bittul and desire to want to internalize the Torah of Hashem, which is truly hidden from anybody, and to be able to bring that down into his own comprehension, into his own understanding, that only comes when you're inside the sukkah, which means when you're enveloped by the Eibishter's Ratzon Elyon, when you recognize that it's higher than you, and you need to have a sense of bittul towards it. Only then can you really truly grasp it. So just to summarize this last seif that we just learned, lulav represents limud Torah. Whether it's a person who is a loimei Torah, whether it's a person who has other things that they do as well, but in this moment they're learning Torah. Person might think, when I'm learning Torah, I'm removed from the world. Says the Alter Rebbe, no. Even lulav has to be in the sukkah. Even lulav, even when you're sitting and learning, it has to be enveloped by the recognition that the Eibishter surrounds me, that my whole being is made up by the Eibishter. Meaning to say that the Torah is higher than me. Just like we say the Yom Tov of Sukkot is what makes the Yom Tov. It's the recognition that the Eibishter surrounds me, and that the Eibishter is much higher than me, that enhances my limud Torah, because it gives me the bittul to recognize this, and because of that I'm able to internalize such a much higher level of learning. That's the Bechlal. Shas Ba'im is nit nur der Esek HaTorah b'Peil. Re'ech di chavivus v'yeker HaTorah, baruch hu b'Torah tchila. So too when it comes to a person in general, when not only does he learn Torah, but he recognizes the preciousness and and he has a love for Torah, which is the words baruch hu b'Torah tchila, that the Yidden not just they learn Torah, but they made a bracha on it first. They recognize that it's the Eibishter's Torah. This causes the opposite of the destruction of the land. And we merit speedily to the Eibishter spreading over us the Sukkah of His peace. In the Binyan Beis Hamikdash was av im steht v'hi b'shalom Sukkah. To the Binyan Beis Hamikdash, which on it says that it will be the completion of the Sukkah, which will be built by Mashiach Tzidkenu speedily in our days. So what we have to do is we have to, in every part of our life, we have to recognize the preciousness of Torah and not separate Torah from the world, but have Torah enveloped, have our limud Torah enveloped, and the preciousness of Torah and the recognition of Torah enveloped by the Eibishter, by the connection with Hashem. Not to say, oh, I already learned Torah, I'm connected. No. There's a higher connection to Hashem that enhances our limud Torah and actually brings Geula to the world.